Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. I just want to say thank you on behalf of the library to the Northwest Arkansas Beekeepers Association. Thank them for bringing this program to us and to all of you. Thank you all for registering. Also, I know there's a bunch of notebooks and literature on your tables, but there's also little evaluation slips. If you could fill those out at some point, and there's a box in the lobby for you to drop them in, we would appreciate that, and so would the Beekeepers Association. So I'm going to turn it over to Jay Davidson right now, and he will introduce the other speakers. Thank you.
Yeah. Big round of applause for the library. It's a great facility, and we really appreciate them hosting it. All this great AV stuff, all these great tables, it works out great. First, I'm going to talk about the series in general, what we're going to do. Tonight is really about an introduction. I can't stand still. I struggle to stand still, so bear with me. Introduction to beekeeping. We're going to just talk about the types of beekeepers, why that's important to hobbyists. There's all kinds of beekeepers out there. We also have bee biology. It's very important to get a grounded foundation in just a general idea. I promise we're not going to get scientific. There's no quizzes, but it's important to get a basic understanding of what the bees are doing and what they're trying to do. So, and a little bit about what's in there. Part 2 is all about equipment and tools. So next Tuesday, we'll be here talking about various equipment options, tools you may need, where to acquire bees, how to install those bees into your equipment. And then on night 3, it's all right, now you got your bees in your hive, now what do you do? How do you manage those? So that's the 3-part series. I already talked about the itinerary, but I do want to take a minute to introduce myself. I'm Jay Davidson. This is Tim Caffrey and Kenneth, who's down there on the end, Kenneth Richardson. Between the 3 of us, we got about 30 years experience. We represent the Northwest Arkansas Beekeepers Association, and we're going to be your instructors. We're not going to bore you with a long intro because, no one needs that. I do want to point out the people running around wearing these yellow lanyards are members of the association, and they are expert beekeepers and would love to answer any and all of your questions. What we found in the past is with this many people, Q&A it's no good. Encourage you to hold your questions, ask the people with the yellow lanyards, and then come to our monthly meeting. We allot plenty of time at our monthly club meetings. We meet every second Monday of the month at the Washington County Extension Office. There's usually 60, 70 of us there. We do educational programs. We bring in guest speakers. It's a good time. It's a good time to collaborate. Ooh. Yeah, and just a little bit about us. We support beekeepers. You will see us doing some education programs. We go to schools sometimes because people ask, but our primary mission is to support other beekeepers. So that's why all the education and stuff like that. Introduce these guys. Y'all are good. Thank you. Next order of business, we do have some door prizes. You guys can help me with that. So if you look at the back of your chair, and you see a white sticky label, you are a winner. Oh, come on up, quick. And you get a shiny new smoker. I've got another smoker to give away. Oh, who's next? All right. Hurry, hurry. A shiny new smoker. And I'm going to give you a choice. We got hive tool. We got a couple of different hive tools to choose from. Help yourself. One more. You welcome to whatever you want to take. If you don't have a good one, those are good ones. There you go. Told you there'd be door prizes, so there we go. All right. Without further ado, we're going to go. First thing I want to talk about is just under the introduction of beekeeping. It's just common myths, what people seem to get wrong about beekeeping, and just make sure that we set expectations correctly. That was the wrong button. One of us is messed up. Probably me. Okay. So one of the misconceptions are bees are aggressive and they're going to sting your neighbors. And the truth is, bees are chill. They're chill as they can be. They're trying to do their thing. You're just in their way sometimes. So if you step on them out in the grass, yep, they're going to protect themselves. And they've got one way to do that with a big old human like us, and that's sting you. So they're not going to go looking for something to sting. They know they're going to die. 9 times out of 10, a bee's going to die as soon as it stings you. Not as soon as, it will go away and die. But they know that. They're sacrificing their life to either defend their hive or to defend themselves. So they don't roam looking for somebody to sting. You need lots of land to keep bees. That's not true. We've got multiple beekeepers in our association that live in Wilson Park and have, one's got 3, one's got 4 maybe. But bees have a some people say 3-mile radius. I think it's more like 2, assuming they can find. But if you go on Google Maps and draw a 3-mile radius around your house, you'll be shocked at the amount of area that covers. And I will say that one of our Wilson Park beekeepers won the honey tasting contest this year. So apparently they're getting some nice irrigated flowers and nectar coming out of the Wilson Park area. So good to know. Another misconception that's messed up, the queen runs the hive. Well, not even close. The queen has a purpose. And if the bees decide she's not up to snuff, she's gone. They'll kill her. They'll raise another one. They'll kick her out of the hive. A queen gets old. She starts not laying very well. So it's a democracy, not a monarchy. And there's a good book called The Honeybee Democracy. Is that the name of the book? Yeah, Honeybee Democracy. So you can look that up. It's very interesting. But bees always make tons of honey. Nope. Some years they make a lot. It all depends on the nectar flow. And that's one thing about beekeeping. You'll become aware. You may not know it today, because I didn't before I started beekeeping. People talk about the nectar flow. What's that? I don't know. I know when things start blooming in my yard, but right now we have some nectar coming in right now, and it's coming from dandelions. And hembit, also, the little purple ones growing out in the grass. So that's providing both pollen and nectar for the bees as well. I'm always shocked when I get out and look at I'm just looking at the bottom board. I'm not opening it up in the winter. But you'll see in January, February, the bees will start coming in and their pollen sacs are just loaded with pollen. I'm like, where are they getting that? But they're finding it. Sorry about the slides. If you get bees, you'll get stung a lot. Well, only if you want to. I was at the Bee Expo up in Louisville I guess it was a month or so ago. Several of us were. And a lady told me that if I'm a beekeeper, I need to get stung 20 to 30 times a month to make sure I don't develop an allergic reaction to bees. And I'm going, probably not happening. So I'm taking my chances. I've kept bees over the years in shorts and a t-shirt. You always wear a veil, but nowadays I just got tired of getting stung all the time, so I wear a little more protective clothing these days. I may go back the other way. So it's entirely up to you. But you do need to find out how you react to bee stings, and so that's important. Beekeeping is a cheap hobby. Negative. Sorry. If you're looking for a cheap hobby, this is probably not it. You can, guys, how cheap, if I really, commercial, $250 for a complete hive, minimum, and maybe some of our suppliers out here might come in close to that, $250 to $275. Bees will run you up to $200 per hive. So you've got $500+ per hive invested. Now there's other ways to do it. There's ways you don't have to buy bees. You can go catch swarms. I've done that. Free bees, but it's precarious and it's a lot of work. But we do have a clearinghouse for swarms, so people call us and say, hey, I got a swarm of bees in my backyard, hep, and we dispatch a beekeeper and the beekeepers are always happy to go get free bees, so they jump right on it. But we can put you on the list and you can go get your own bees. But again, it's not a cheap hobby. Beekeeping, you can set it and forget it, and that's just not true. I hate using the term livestock, but I'm trying to make a point with you guys because people tend to think of bees as very natural. I'm just providing them a natural hive to live in. But the truth is, the bees you buy, you got to think of them more like livestock, at least initially, until you know what you're doing and get going. It's just like having chickens. You couldn't just stick your chickens out in a coop and gather up eggs once a week. It just wouldn't work. The chickens would die. The bees, if you just set them and forget it, they're going to die as well. But the good news is you don't have to be in your hive every week either. So there's a happy medium between the two. Good beekeepers don't lose hives. So raise your hand if you've ever lost a hive. So basically everybody with a yellow lanyard just raised their hand. And I make that point because we all lose bees for a variety of different reasons. You're going to lose bees. Sorry. Your $200 is going to go. And what we're going to teach you is tips and tricks and kind of techniques. We're going to teach you a way. There's 100 different ways. What you're going to learn and what you're going to hear us repeat nonstop is you ask 5 beekeepers the same question, you're going to probably get 10 answers. You are. And none of them are going to be wrong. It's just the way it is. It depends. You ask a beekeeper a question, 7 out of 10 times they're going to say, well, it depends. And the other time they're going to do it a little coy, is going to say, well, you could do that. But there's a lot of different ways to keep bees. What works in your yard with your microclimate is going to be different than mine. And it's what we're going to teach you, though, is a way that we believe is approachable and will make you be, because our goal is to get you through that first year. After that, all that next winter in those winter doldrums and you're, down the YouTube rabbit hole, you may go, hey, that's cool. I want to try that. That's how I beekeep. The way I kept bees 15 years ago is vastly different than the way I keep bees today. And I've got a little bit of everything going on in my yards as well. So there's no one way to keep bees. And that's how you know you shouldn't be talking to somebody. If you talk to a beekeeper and he says, oh, you got to do this, and you got to do this, and you got to do that, you probably don't. That's probably not a great person to get information from, because you don't got to do anything in beekeeping. You got to know what you're trying to do. You got to have a goal, and you got to work towards that goal. So, you'll hear a lot of stuff on the internet. You'll follow Cayman Reynolds and some of these other, beekeeping personalities. They have commercial operations. They're selling, hundreds and thousands of hives every year. How they manage their hives makes absolutely no sense for a hobbyist. And what makes sense for you makes absolutely no sense to him. I mean, he needs, standardized equipment. He can't spend, 30 minutes in a hive. So just keep that in mind as you're listening to other sources and talking to other people. Take it all in, but also remember, the other thing about the internet that I'll caution you on is you got to know what part of the country, whoever's telling you what they're telling you, be sure you know where they're from. Because if they're from up north, they're going to tell you, oh, you got to wrap your hives every winter, and then otherwise they're going to die. Your bees are not going to die. You don't need to wrap here. In fact, we have screen bottom boards. Most of us don't even bother putting the board in the bottom through the winter. They can thermoregulate to beat the band. They can handle it. Now, if it's predicted to be minus 20 for a week, maybe you put the bottom boards in, but other than that, don't worry about it. So, without further ado, I think, Kenneth, you're up.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. How's everyone doing? My name's Kenny Richardson, as Jay said. I'll be quite honest. I severely underestimated the turnout of this event. I was expecting, maybe 30, 40, on the high end 60. So this is a fabulous turnout. So I just want to thank you all for coming out. You know, the weeknights are very important and special, especially if you got younger ones back home or other family members. So definitely thank you for coming out. We want to make it worth your time. Hopefully you walk away from this with a few tidbits of knowledge that you didn't have when you came in. So I'm Kenny. As a side hobby, operate Hazel Valley Honey. So we have anywhere between 50 to 100 hives, depending on the time of the year. If you know where Terra Studios is anybody familiar with Terra Studios? So that's Hazel Valley Road. If you just go 7 miles down Hazel Valley Road, you'll find Hazel Valley Honey and where we keep most of our bees out there. I've been doing this since 2019, we got into it. My father and I, it was something I was always interested in from a distance. And we bought 2 nukes and just dove right in. Kind of the rest is history, if you will. So first and foremost, let's get kind of a show of hands. How many of you have never kept bees before? Okay, high percentage. Let's say 95% plus. And then, has anyone made it through 1 winter with at least a hive? Nice. Through 5 winters. Okay, this class is not for you. Just kidding, you can probably still learn something, but that's awesome, that's awesome. So you're in the right place. What I'm gonna walk through here on night 1 with my portion is types of beekeepers, and then we'll get a little bit into pollinators. So first up, just types of beekeepers. There's really 3 main categories, if you will, and this is really more industry nomenclature than anything. So a hobbyist is usually anyone from 1 to 10 hives. That's the vast majority of beekeepers in the country. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I've met many very knowledgeable, very successful beekeepers that stay in the hobbyist range. It's fantastic. So in this range, you're looking at, in Northwest Arkansas, you could run 2 to 5 hives even, and after you get a year or 2 under your belt and you start to click in your system, figure out what works for you and your locale, like Jay's talking about, it's reasonable to think 1 hive could throw off 20 or 30 or 40 pounds of surplus honey, and that's enough for you, your friends, and your family. That's a totally attainable goal. It takes some learning to get there for sure, but it's totally attainable, and so that's this category. I would say the benefits here are your bees can be very much your pets, absolutely. They will never personally get to know you, but you can absolutely personally get to know them. What's their temperament? What do you do that they dislike? That's a great one to get to know about 1 hive. Even in yards when we have like 15 or 20 hives, if I go into a hive and it's nice and sunny and they tell me they don't want me there, we mark that hive. Now I know. This is a hot hive. Be careful when you go in there. So that's kind of the 1 to 10 range. Then you move up into a term you'll hear is sideliner. And I don't think there's an exact quantitative threshold that defines these categories necessarily. A sideliner would be kind of similar to where Hazel Valley Honey is. You're running more bees than is a hobby. And it's gotten to where the expenses to keep it running require you to start generating some kind of revenue, I'd say. That defines a sideliner. Now, being profitable is very different from generating revenue. If you've ever had a side hobby that you've pursued for many years, profitability is tough. But that's kind of where the sideliner sits. 20 to 300 colonies would be roughly a good gauge there. And then we move all the way up to commercial. These are the outfits that you've seen documentaries about, right? When everyone, or most people in this room are aware of almond pollination, I assume. These are those outfits. A lot of these outfits, not only are they, master beekeepers, usually very adept at keeping bees alive, but they're logistics companies, really, is what they are, if they're in the commercial pollination. And then here's just kind of a nice map to show. Jay was talking about the YouTube rabbit hole. There are a lot. I'm sure many of us in this room have gone down some beekeeping YouTube rabbit holes. There's several really good commercial beekeeping channels out there. And they do a great job of just showing you what a big operation looks like. It's fascinating. And a lot of that's the commercial pollination. So how do you schedule a semi-load of beehives to go out to California in February, and then as they make their way back to the eastern seaboard, hit different main crops to pollinate along the way? It's fascinating. That's not really a topic for any of us, but it's still really fun to listen to nonetheless. Okay, probably the most important thing with commercial beekeepers is there's pros and cons that they offer to us hobbyists. I'll start with a couple of the pros. Innovation. Innovation is a really big thing, and at the commercial scale, they're usually the tip of the spear, right? They've got more resources to play with, more money. That's where a lot of the innovation comes to be. So just to name a few, one of the things you're gonna have to figure out what your strategy is on as a new beekeeper is your varroa mite management. Who's heard of a varroa mite? Perfect. That, if you take away anything from tonight, that's public enemy number one as a beekeeper. If you don't have a varroa mite strategy, varroa mites will be the collapse of your colony. It might happen in year one, you might make it to year 3, but somewhere around year 1, 2, 3, 4, if you're not doing something about varroa mites, that'll be the end of your colony. That's a whole nother topic, which we will certainly get into. However, on the commercial front, they've figured out a few different strategies. So there's a few different buckets in synthetic miticides, organic miticides, not gonna go all the way down to it. One of the things they've brought forth that's practical to the hobbyist is the use of oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is an organic miticide. Naturally occurs in nature. The commercial beekeepers have used different substrates, whether it's vaporizing it or mixing it with glycerin and using it in an extended release form. They've helped bring different mediums of oxalic acid to the hobbyist beekeeper so that we can have affordable varroa mite control until hopefully the holy grail is that the bees evolve and figure out how to deal with their own varroa mites. Very much the way a lot of us deal with ticks, right? We coexist with ticks. There are some downsides to ticks, but usually ticks aren't the end of us. The goal is that the bees figure that out themselves, but in the meantime, we have to have strategies. Another one that's very big for a benefit that commercial beekeepers offer to us is the availability of queens and packages or nukes. So a lot of big commercial outfits raise and rear thousands of queens in a matter of a couple months every year. So if you ever find yourself in a pickle and you can't find a local queen, the internet's great. You can usually very quickly find a queen to order online, whether it be from, hopefully you can get it locally, but if not, Georgia, Florida, queens ship overnight. It's fantastic if you're in a pinch and that's where you find yourself. That's thanks to the commercial industry. They also come with some downsides, right? There's several, but probably the biggest one is just disease and pests. So I'm sure that some of you, if not all, probably, are getting into bees because you love agriculture or you love animals or you want to produce your own natural honey because it's probably gonna be better than what you can buy in the store, right? Something along those lines. It's not hard to imagine how trucking millions of hives across the country probably becomes a vector for disease. So that's probably the biggest downside to commercial beekeeping. Honeycomb, beeswax holds on to disease and chemicals for a long time. So if I had to say there was any one downside to commercial beekeeping, that's probably it. Comes with benefits, also comes with downsides. You just have to kind of be aware of that. Cool, so we're gonna transition into getting to know our pollinators. So full transparency, when I was asked to speak tonight, some of these slides are not on honeybees, they're on different bees. So I, in preparing for this, actually learned a little bit about bees that are not honeybees that I'm hoping some of you can take tonight as well. So for starters, I think it's an understatement to I think it's obvious of how important pollinators are, especially for our food system, right? So, I mean, the big headline here being 87 of 115 major food crops depend on some form of animal pollination. They contribute heavily to biodiversity. And having lots of pollinators is, for many reasons, an obvious indicator of ecological health, right? The honeybee plays a big role there. Okay, so who are the pollinators? We've got many different groups, from your birds and your bats, right? All the way down to butterflies, wasps, bees, and even your regular houseflies, right? So within the order of Hymenoptera, I learned that word just last night, actually. There's 7 families of bees worldwide. 6 are in the U.S. And 2 main buckets here that you can put bees into would be solitary and social bees. And then 2 nesting styles, ground and cavity. And we'll go more into the solitary social aspect, because I think that that's one of the most unique things to honeybees and what makes them so cool. But some ground nesters, we've all seen, many of these flying around. I didn't know until a few years back, actually, that bumblebees could nest in the ground. And maybe some of you, not naming names, maybe I did, figured that out with a mower. They didn't like that too much, but I liked it less. So bumblebees can be ground nesters, along with some of these other ones here. And then you get into cavity nesters. We've got some good variety. And here falls our honeybee as part of the cavity nester. Oh yeah. Thank you, Tim. Yeah. Dry mouth sounds obvious, huh? Thank you, Tim. Make sure I don't spill that. Okay, so we have cavity nesters, and then within Arkansas, let me just jump back actually 2 seconds. Okay. Among the other insects, personally, something I find the most fascinating about the honeybee is they are incredibly social. They are a super organism, right? So a couple key points there. The honeybee, the individual honeybee, actually does not have an immune system. The immune system is within the hive itself. So there's a substance called propolis. It's something that they forage from trees. It is their construction adhesive. It is also antibacterial, antimicrobial. Honey, how many people in here are aware of honey's healing effects? And if honey, in the process of making honey, bees take nectar and they actually reduce its pH. And in the reduction of that pH, hydrogen peroxide is actually a byproduct. So that's kind of at the core of the healing of honey. All that being said, the individual bee is not equipped with the immune system that you and I are equipped with. Their immune system comes in their numbers, within their colony, in those things. So that is their advantage. That is why right now in February, Jay was talking about dandelions. There's also red maples. Does anyone have a red maple tree that they're aware of, either on their commute or in their backyard? If you do, pay attention to it. It's about to open up. They're about to start blooming. They're budding right now. They're about to start blooming. That will be the first major pollen source for honeybees in Northwest Arkansas. You might have some other ones in your locale, but the red maple is fairly well spread here. All that being said, because they're social creatures and they overwinter in a cavity, they have a serious advantage at the beginning of the year. So in the months of February, March, April, they will outcompete the bumblebee. They will outcompete the red wasp, for the most part. Not outcompete them into extinction, but it's what gives them their big advantage. One other term to take away in terms of the socialness of the honeybee is a term, polyandry. So one of the YouTube channels I like a lot is a gentleman named Bob Binney. He's a commercial beekeeper. Some of you may have heard of him. He's out in Georgia. He interviewed a University of Georgia professor, Keith Delaplane. Keith Delaplane has done a lot of research. He's very well published in the honeybee world. He also has a really good beginner book called First Lessons in Beekeeping. Keith Delaplane, definitely recommend that. Anyways, Bob Binney interviewed him, posted the video. It's all about polyandry. What is polyandry, Kenny? It's actually kind of the inverse of polygamy, which we give a very bad rap to. But in the insect world, polyandry is one female, one reproductive female, mating with many males, right? It's not incredibly common in the animal insect world, but it is the case with the honeybee. It is what gives them their diverse advantage. So what do I mean by that? One queen, if she's successful in her mating flight, will mate with anywhere from 10 to 20 drones, is what you hear quoted. However, they have found queens who have mated with up to 70 drones. A drone is a male bee. Why is that important? If a queen is mated with 30 drones, 30 different males, she has all of their chromosomes in her spermatheca. She is a diversity machine, right? And so there's a built-in mechanism there to prevent inbreeding and to maintain vigor, diverse vigor over the years. Again, just going back to something unique to the honeybee that many other insects do not have. And it really is like kind of at the core, how is this practical? When you start beekeeping, I hope very much that you are successful, you make it through your first winter, and then in March, April, that colony is bursting at the seams, and you have to split it. And maybe you'll get lucky, and there will be some queen cells in there, and you can use a queen cell to make a new colony off the one that made it through the winter. And then that queen that comes out of there, in very many ways, you will feel like it's your baby. She'll go out and get mated with 30 different drones than what your first queen had, and you're gonna have a totally different set of traits in this second colony. And it's fascinating, it's fascinating. And you'll see colony number 2, although she's a daughter of colony number 1 queen, they're so different. Maybe they forage more honey, maybe they're more docile, maybe they're more mean, but they'll be different, and that's just really cool. I find that fascinating. Very unique to Apis mellifera, the honeybee. So moving forward here, Arkansas, so 4,000 species of bees native to North America. Arkansas has got about 10% of them. It's way more than I thought, 400 to 650 species of bees native to Arkansas. Honeybees are not native to Arkansas. This should not necessarily come as a surprise, although it has certainly come as a surprise to me when I picked up beekeeping. So kind of the background story of Apis mellifera, also very fascinating, also a rabbit hole. But long story short, we think that the honeybee as we know it today evolved in Europe and was brought over 400 to 500 years ago. And so they've been here that long. It's kind of funny, we hear the term invasive and native all the time, but I always think in my head, well, if you go back far enough, everything is non-native, right? So the honeybee is here in large numbers. We get a lot of benefit from it. And if we manage them properly, they won't outcompete native species into extinction. Yes, they're gonna have advantages in some ways, shapes, and form, but they won't be the end of our native bees. Right, so just some habitat planning and planting. How many people have a garden? Awesome. How many people are hoping their bees will help increase their crop in that garden? Yes. This was reason number 1 that my wife and I got into honeybees. So that's fantastic. And kind of the takeaway here is we're fortunate in many ways here in Northwest Arkansas. We don't live around any, mega industrial ag, monocrop fields, soybeans, corn, rice, not to shed a negative light on those necessarily, but we're fortunate in some ways that we don't live there, so we're not exposed to all that pesticide. But then also, a lot of those crops can bring a boom of nectar and produce large honey crops, unlike we can get here. So we trade off a little bit of honey crop for the diversity. And all that being said, like, the margins and the hedgerows are incredibly important. It's amazing, like, for example, how my outlook on sumac changed when I became a beekeeper. I think if you bring up sumac to people who are aware of it that don't keep bees, they're generally a negative connotation, like, no, isn't that poisonous? I don't want that sumac, spray something on it or cut it. But then you have bees and you realize, oh, in July, sumac can be a serious nectar source that, you know, while nothing else is providing. So we see a sumac tree now and we're like, oh, keep that sumac. Don't spray it, don't cut it down. So you'll start paying attention to plants a lot more if you don't already when you start to keep bees. Then kind of just to close out here, very significant, the honeybee is the insect of the state of Arkansas, and it's featured on our seal and, you know, hopefully is here to stay for a long time. I'm gonna turn it over to Tim now, and he's gonna take you guys through some honeybee biology. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Tim Caffrey. I've been keeping bees for, this will be my 12th year. So the first time I bought 2 nukes and installed them in my yard in a place that in retrospect was a really bad place to put them, and tried to raise my bees, I was crushed because both of my colonies died the following winter. And so I guess the first point there is that it's not easy, but it's also not terribly difficult either. There's a fairly steep learning curve, especially at the beginning, but it's not that you can't overcome it. Anyone can do it, and it's possible to be successful. The one thing that I didn't learn early on that I'd share with you is that your bee yard or your apiary is actually a resource that grows over the years. And in the way it grows, it doesn't only grow in the number of colonies you might have, but it grows in the amount of wax you have on your frames. And you can actually begin to have frames that have wax on it that you can use again the next year. So the bees don't have to draw out a whole new frame of wax, for example. And then years down the road, when you have a weak colony, you can take a frame of honey or a frame of brood babies, and you can transfer it from a strong hive to a weaker hive, and in that way your entire bee yard begins to become stronger and more vital. So it may look hard at first when you first start out, because you have 5 frames with drawn comb and brood and a little bit of honey and nothing else, but slowly but surely over time, as you build up those resources, you begin to have an apiary, and you can become to be successful. I'm definitely in that hobbyist category, and I plan to be in that category forever. I don't ever intend to go bigger. I've had as many as 8 hives and as few as 3. I'm currently have 6 hives that have made it through the winter, pretty strong, so I'm pretty happy. Yeah, so with that in mind, you know, you can be any kind of beekeeper you want, as Kenny pointed out, and get what you need out of it. You don't necessarily make a killing, but if you eventually get to the point where you have surplus honey and your wife and your children don't eat you out of house and home of that honey, you can begin to sell some of it, and who knows, maybe you can make up some of your costs and even break a little even, and then actually start making a few bucks year over year. So that's all very possible. So I'm going to talk about honeybee biology, and the goal here is to understand how bees work, so it'll make it easier for you to work with them, okay? The first question is, what do bees want? And here we have a couple of hives in the wild, and you can see in the one below how the bees have drawn comb vertically, and there are, 5 different lines of comb with bees on them. So in a natural hive, bees are looking for a sheltered cavity. They want adequate size for growth because they don't want to be hemmed in as they do grow. They want a small and defensible entrance so that they don't get attacked by predators anywhere from other honeybees all the way up to bears, for example. And the next thing they want is the ability to draw comb. So create these parallel rows of honeycomb. And the bee space between the combs is another really important point that I want to emphasize. The bee space is basically the space that a bee needs to walk along. So your combs are, as they grow, as beeswax is deposited, the bees will actually grow them parallel to one another to the point where there's only the space for one or two bees to walk on. And they'll stop right there because they want to be able to get up and down the walls of that comb to either, in the case of the queen, lay an egg, or in the case of a worker, either tend to the young brood or to deposit honey. And then later, in the cold temperature times, when there's a dearth of nectar, to actually get to the honey and eat that honey to keep them alive over the winter. So the bee space is an important factor when you look at bees in the wild. And then when you apply the idea of the bee space to artificially creating that space as we do as beekeepers, you want to preserve that bee space and enable the bees to have all those capabilities inside your easy-to-manage box. So that's exactly how modern hives are modeled. So, we try and simulate, we create this simulated environment where the bees can do what they do naturally. It may not be perfect, and it may have its own issues, and there are several different types of hives also, but the general idea is still the same. You have vertical sections and space in between them, and you allow the bees to draw comb to the point where they still have the bee space in between. So as we mentioned, a bee colony or a beehive is a superorganism, okay? The queen doesn't run the show, neither does any one bee. None of the bees live long enough to ever run the show, so to speak. But for some reason, as an organism, it's a very successful organism in competing from a biological standpoint. And again, as a beekeeper, we have to respect that superorganism and learn to understand how it works. First, there's the anatomy of the bee. Wasps don't have as much hair as bees and tend to be longer and thinner, but it belongs to the same large family of insects that also includes ants. The anatomy is a 3-part body, and you see all the different parts there. This is a worker bee. Of course, there's 3 different castes of bees, and we'll talk about those next. But one things to point out on this particular one is the pollen basket on the rear legs. So when the worker bees are out collecting pollen from flowers, they collect it with their front arms, and then they deposit it in these little areas on their rear legs that they store like little balls, and then fly back to the hive, and then pass them off to worker bees inside the hive that are greeting them at the entrance. And so sometimes you'll see bees flying around, and you'll see these bright yellow balls on their back legs, and that's pollen. Of course, there's a stinger. Now, drones don't have stingers, just the worker bees. And as mentioned, bees aren't out to sting you, because when they do sting you, they eviscerate themselves and die. So, it's not to their personal advantage to sting you, but if they feel like they need to defend the hive, then they'll sting you. So there's 3 castes of honeybees: a worker bee, a queen, and a drone, okay? And we'll go over each one of them in detail. The worker bee, of course, compromises the largest percentage. Almost all the bees in the hive are worker bees. They're females, so they come from fertilized eggs. The queen, after her maiden flight or her nuptial flight, and she has this experience of so many polyandrous encounters with drones, goes back to the hive and begins to lay. She can lay unfertilized eggs as well as fertilized eggs. Okay, that's an important point. And of course, the fertilized eggs become worker bees, or potentially additional queens. So the worker bee does pretty much everything in the hive, okay? From house cleaning, nursing new bees, foraging, collecting pollen, collecting nectar, transforming the nectar into what will eventually become honey by digesting it and then regurgitating it and digesting it eventually and reducing the amount of, not only changing the pH, but reducing the moisture content in the nectar before depositing it into the honeycombs. Worker bees also are responsible for thermal regulation of the hive, which is relatively important because eggs that are developing brood, need a very narrow temperature window with which to thrive in. So the work of the superorganism of the hive needs to regulate the temperature inside the hive. And they do that in several different ways, one of which is fanning their wings very quickly and having air pass through the colony or out of the colony to thermoregulate. So the worker bee pretty much does everything. Worker bees also guard the hive. Certain worker bees will guard the hive. And over the course of their lifetime, they'll probably do each one of these tasks before they die. So typical lifespan of a worker bee is 3 to 5 weeks. There is a generation of bees that overwinters, and they can live as long as 4 or 5 months. So that's the exception. But typically, 3 to 5 weeks is the lifespan of a worker bee. All right, we've talked about the pollen baskets and the stinger, and the fact that the worker bees pretty much do everything inside the hive. Pardon?
Exactly like that.
Hey, don't steal my thunder. That comes later. That's a good joke, though. Yeah. So the queen. The queen is obviously the royal role. She, we've heard already, when a queen hatches and goes out on its nuptial flight, it mates with many drones in these areas called drone concentration areas, which are typically these large towering sections of air where, for some relatively unknown reason, hundreds of drones congregate, waiting for maiden virgin queens to fly. Now, on those flights, the drones actually, when they copulate with the queen, they actually die. So they also, it's one of those things, it's not unusual in the animal and insect world that males actually perish from the act of reproduction. So maybe that's the other side of the worker bees doing all the work. So the crazy thing about a queen bee is when she flies back to the hive and starts laying eggs, but maybe 4 or 5 days later, she will lay eggs like a machine. She could a healthy young queen can lay 1,000 eggs a day, 1,500 eggs a day. So that and as Kenny mentioned, she's also producing eggs from many different fraternal sources, different drones. And she can also lay eggs that are unfertilized. And those unfertilized eggs will become drones. So what's interesting is that drones don't have a father, but they have a grandfather. A queen will live from 2 to 5 years, so much, much longer than worker bees. Typically, a queen's production actually starts to drop after a couple of years, and in their 4th or 5th year, her laying capability begins to drop off the table quite a bit. And as a beekeeper managing a hive, you would have wanted to requeen already by that time. So what typically happens in beekeeping is after 2, maybe in the 3rd or certainly in the 4th year, a beekeeper to maximize honey production and keep their hive as healthy as possible will actually replace the queen. So a queen bee is long and skinny. She's got kind of a shiny thorax, as you can see, a lot less hair than the other 2 castes, and very long, slender shape. Almost looks like, it's funny. There's one queen in a hive, right? And there's up to 60,000 bees in a hive. Some people are really good at spotting queens. I don't know, about beekeepers in the room, do you consider yourself good at spotting queens? Can I see a show of hands? I am not. I have a hard time finding my queens. I had a friend, a complete novice, come over to my bee yard once. I was looking for the queen. He was just like, there it is. I was like, how did you see that? Anyway, it's good to know where your queen is. Sometimes when you're doing an inspection, I use sound as a way of guidance. Sometimes if I pull a frame out and I put it on the side, when I'm inspecting a hive, and the sound of the colony, the actual murmuring, if you want to call it that, buzzing of the bees, changes, it almost tells me that the bee has left the box and the worker bees are a little bit worried. So sound can sometimes be kind of interesting too when you're working bees. Pheromones, very important. So pheromones are chemicals that the queen releases, and they are, as she moves around the hive, she deposits pheromones on the comb, and she also releases pheromones into the air. And many of those pheromones help the worker bees in the colony to understand what needs to be done. Say she's languishing and she needs to be replaced. The pheromones that she puts off, or the lack of pheromones that she should be putting off, tells the worker bees in the colony that maybe it's time to supersede this queen and replace her with another queen. Or maybe it's time to build swarm cells and try and split this colony into 2. It's not the only use of pheromones. Pheromones also help manage the colony for several other reasons. All right, let's talk about drones. So they have a single purpose, right? They are the male bees, and their job is to mate with virgin queens. They don't do any work in the colony. They consume honey, and they sit around, and then they go out and fly to these drone concentration zones, as I mentioned, and they mate with virgin queens. They're much larger. When they fly, they actually do drone. It's almost a distinguishable difference in the sound that their flight makes. They're stout, and they're quite a bit bigger than worker bees. They can't sting. They have no stinger. They rely on worker bees for all their needs. So drones only exist seasonally. The beekeeping and the cycle of bees is very seasonal, okay? Typically in the winter, the colony is trying to survive. They're in a cluster. They're thermal regulating. They're feeding off the honey they have stored. And then as spring starts to come around, pollen starts to be available, and nectar starts to flow from flowers, the population of the colony grows. And the queen begins to lay eggs at a fast rate. Over the wintertime, the queen doesn't lay eggs at all. So early around this time of year, perhaps maybe a couple weeks early or a couple weeks later, the queen begins to lay eggs slowly based on temperature and the amount of pollen. and the amount of nectar that's coming into the colony. And the superorganism strategy is to maximize the population of foraging worker bees so that they can accumulate the maximum amount of pollen and nectar possible. So it's kind of an effort on the part of the colony to anticipate when to have all those babies hatching, okay? All that brood hatching. So that's when you'll also see colonies explode in size and the amount of nectar growing considerably. And you'll also have a lot of colonies deciding to swarm. Now, I don't know if we're going to talk about swarming next week, or Jay, are we talking swarming next week, or should I go into it a little bit? Oh, later in this one. Okay. So a colony will swarm when it's running out of room, or it's growing so fast that it's about to run out of room. And swarming is really a sign of success. It's the biological effort to reproduce itself. So go from one colony to 2 colonies. And typically, when there's a swarm, it produces a virgin queen. So when that virgin queen hatches and it goes out and flying, the drones have their purpose. They're going to try and mate with that virgin queen on her nuptial flight, okay? And that's typically, at least in our climate, April, May, maybe June, okay? So once that seasonal aspect of swarming has ended, there is no use for the drones. They're just sitting around drinking beer, watching football on TV. So what happens is the workers kick them out. And they actually kick them out and kill them. So going into the winter, there are no drones in the colony, just one queen and a relatively small population of overwintering workers that live 5 to 6 months.
Yeah, we're scheduled to take a quick break. I'm going to ask everybody to keep it down to like 5-10 minutes so we can cover everything and get you guys out of here on time. So again, remember, talk to a guy with a yellow lanyard if you have some questions. Restrooms are to the right down the hall. Please help yourself to the refreshments. And at 6:40, we'll start talking whether you're here or not. Okay, you gotta let Tim come back up here because he's got more talking to do. Of all the bee biology, I'm just going to say right here, this is the one you need to understand as a beekeeper. This one's important. And Tim will tell you why.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. All right, so the queen's laying away 1,000+ eggs a day. And in this slide, we see her laying an egg at the bottom of a comb. And that egg hatches in 3 days. And then between days 3 and 8 or 9, that larva is fed. And the first 3 days, it's fed something that's called brood food or royal jelly. Royal jelly implies that it only goes to the queen, and that's actually not true. All fresh larvae get 3 days of brood food, but a queen, a larva that's going to become a queen gets brood food or royal jelly much longer. Okay. So after the larva has grown, on day 9 or 10, the worker bees seal the top of the comb. And the worker bee, the pupa, develops and continues to grow until day 21, when it emerges on its own from the cell and is an adult worker bee. So this is the life cycle. When you're working with your beehives, you will see several different kinds of cells, and we'll see some slides here in a little bit about what you'll be looking for. But each one of these stages you'll be able to recognize on the frame. So each of the 3 castes actually have different stages of development. As I said, what we saw before was the worker bee. And the egg is for 3 days, the larva is for 6, roughly, days, and then the pupa is quite a bit different. So depending on the caste, anywhere from 21 days to 24 days for drones and 16 days for a queen. The larva that will develop into a queen is fed royal jelly for 6 days versus 3 days, whereas the workers are fed a combination of pollen and nectar after day 3. So that's why they develop differently. And of course, the drone is developed from an unfertilized egg to become a male. Okay, so worker bees, as I mentioned, they go through several different stages. For the first several days, all they do is kind of clean themselves, get fed, and then begin to clean other cells. And then when they're really young, they begin to produce royal jelly by regurgitating a really high and potent mixture of pollen. And it's actually a high protein gel, royal jelly. After 6 to 9 days, they begin to feed the older larvae that are growing in the uncapped cells. And then they graduate to a different stage where they're house bees. And they grow wax, and this is a really nice photograph because it shows the wax glands on the underside of the back of a worker bee. So it takes a lot of energy for a bee to produce wax. It produces this wax, it grabs it with its hind legs and brings it up and chews it up, softens it up, and then deposits it with its hand and with its mouth to create honeycomb. Honeycomb is a very valuable asset, as I mentioned earlier. Over the next 2 weeks, what they do is they convert nectar to honey. And oftentimes they'll meet foraging bees at the entrance when they come into the hive, and they'll exchange the pollen and the nectar with the forager and take it further into the hive, and the forager turns around and flies off on another foraging run. So they're building wax, they're guarding and heating, as I mentioned earlier, and then toward the end of their lives, they become field bees. And they fly out and they forage local flowers to collect pollen and nectar. As I mentioned those pollen sacs earlier, there's a really nice photo of that. They also collect water because the water is an important element, not only for consumption, but also in the production of wax to a degree, and also for cooling of the hive. Water is part of the thermal regulation inside the hive. And finally, they collect tree sap. And tree sap is used to make propolis. Propolis is a really sticky, gummy material that bees use to plug up small holes in the hive, amongst other things. And as I mentioned, you know, the bee gap, you know, the gap that a bee can walk in between. When the space is larger than that bee gap, they will draw honeycomb. Where the spaces are smaller than that, they'll deposit propolis. So they're either filling open areas with propolis or filling it with honeycomb. Now here is a close-up of a frame. And you can see a couple things on this frame. First of all, this long vertical member is a queen cell. So queens are quite large, and the honeycomb cells that they emerge from are so large that they don't grow vertically from the comb wall. They actually pivot 90 degrees and grow downward. Over on the right side, we have drone cells. Drones are bigger than worker bees, so the capping ends up being domed, so they have enough room, for the pupa has enough room to grow and develop into an adult drone. So your queen is fully developed in 16 days. When a queen hatches, one of the first things that she will do is dispatch the competition, which, you know, is a nice way of saying she's going to look around for other queen cells that haven't hatched yet, and she will kill them because it's a direct competition at that point. She's hatched. Her urge to survive is to kill the competition and then go out on her mating flight. We saw the drone cells there as well. And we've already talked about what a drone does. Here's a frame with multiple queen cells, and this is basically a swarm frame. This is, as I mentioned, when a colony decides that it's going to reproduce itself and become two colonies, it will produce a lot of queens. And with the hope that, you know, if one fails, if one goes out and it's maiden flight and a scarlet tanager happens to be standing on top of the hive and the queen flies out and the tanager hits it and swallows it in one bite, you just lost your potential for propagating your colony and doubling it. So typically you'll see, you know, many queen cells when a colony has grown to exceed the size of its box. If the nectar flow is really good, it's still spring or, you know, it's still mid-May, that colony is going to want to swarm. There's also something called supersedure cells. I mentioned how when a queen gets old, its production goes down, and the entire colony can kind of understand that, both by the amount of drone or the amount of brood that's in the colony, but also by the pheromone that the queen's emitting. They decide they're going to get rid of that older queen and grow a new one. And typically a supersedure cell, which is called supersedure, a supersedure cell will be grown in the middle of a frame as opposed to the bottom of a frame. The swarm cells typically are on the bottom of the frames. There's also emergency queen production. Say, for example, you're a clumsy beekeeper and you accidentally squish the queen. You know, you wouldn't be the first beekeeper in the world that did that. You're pulling out a frame and it kind of wobbles back and forth, and unbeknownst to you, you squish the queen and kill it right up against the side of the box, right? Well, as long as there are eggs that have been recently laid that the worker bees can convert into a queen, then they can do that. They can produce a queen. And because they're queenless at that point. And the worst thing for a colony is to be queenless, right? They can make that colony queens right, but they'll have a big gap of brood production. So their brood production won't commence again until that egg that they make into a queen hatches and then goes out on her maiden flight. So all of a sudden you have a 20-day gap in brood production, and that really puts the colony at risk. All right, so here's what the hive population looks like throughout the year. As I mentioned, it's a very seasonal thing. You know, the brood production picks up in the spring when there are certain signals in terms of the nectar and pollen flow. And then your adult bee population, hopefully at the time when the nectar flow is the highest, which is mid-May, is as high as it's possibly going to be. And they're collecting as much nectar as possible to convert to honey. And then as the year goes on, there are nectar flows in the fall. We don't have a complete dearth here in Northwest Arkansas, but it's much less. So most of the nectar and most of your honey production is going to happen from mid-April to mid-June at the latest, okay? So, and then there's the colony population of relatively small that overwinters, and a generation of worker bees that lasts about 5 to 6 months. Hive communication. So bees need to communicate, and I was talking about pheromones. Bees need to communicate the identity of the colony. You know, if you have a bee yard like those commercial beekeepers you see, a worker bee's coming back and there's 60 colonies in a row, that bee needs to know which one is his colony because he's part of that superorganism. And by pheromones and by his own her own navigation techniques, she can find the colony. Bees also communicate dangers and also the location of resources. And one of the coolest, well, I mentioned pheromones, but one of the coolest ways that bees communicate is with dances, waggle dances. Bees that go out scouting for forage and come back will actually go through a very complicated dance and wiggle motion and motion with their wings that communicate not only the direction of where the resource they're trying to communicate to other foragers is, but also the distance away it is. And it's quite interesting because it's oriented to the location of the sun to the actual hexagonal cells in the box, which is amazing. Queen pheromones. The queen produces a lot of pheromones. One is for identity and stabilization of the colony. It stimulates brood rearing, so a queen that's laying a lot will set out a pheromone that encourages the worker bees to pick up the pace and really help raise all that brood. It attracts drones for mating when she's out on her flight. It's also used for swarming and to control rearing of replacement queens. So these chemicals that the queen puts out are relatively important. The workers also have pheromones, and one of the more important one is the alarm pheromone. And I guess bananas is in here because it smells a little bit like bananas. So if one bee stings a beekeeper and dies, that bee's pheromones will set off the alarm, and the other bees in the colony will hear the alarm, and they'll get real edgy. And if you've got a sting and you've got a bunch of bees coming at you, well, I kind of messed up there. I'm going to have to finish my business very efficiently, very smoothly, and put the cover on this hive and get away from here because I don't want to get bit again. I don't want to get stung again. I get stung, but I wear a lot of protective equipment. I see people on YouTube with bee beards or just working their hives with absolutely no protective equipment on. I really admire that, but I've been stung too many times to try to do that. So I'm one of these people that uses a fair amount of protective equipment when I work my bees. And a lot of these pheromones help in the rearing of the brood as well. Okay, let's talk about swarming. I've already mentioned quite a bit about swarming, but this is the way that a bee colony reproduces. It goes from one bee colony to 2 bee colonies. And it might happen as many as 3 times a year. It might happen once a year. With a colony that's relatively weak, it may not happen at all. But what happens is the old queen leaves the box and takes roughly 1/2, a little bit more than half, of the worker bees with her. And she flies away in search of a new home. Simultaneously, all those queen cells that we saw at the bottom of the frame earlier, a queen is about to hatch and go out on her maiden flight, and the new queen will stay with the box and the rest of the worker bees. So when nectar flow begins, let's say you've got a box and it's nearly full with brood and with honey from over the winter, and the superorganism of the colony recognizes that there's not enough room, and this is a great year for nectar, for example, they will swarm, or they will try to swarm. Now, beekeepers have very ample methods of preventing the swarms because it hurts the beekeeper, because all of your honey collecting resources, at least half of them have just left. So that's going to hurt your honey collection for that year. So beekeepers create artificial swarms by splitting a colony and keeping the old bee in one half and keeping the new unhatched queens in the other. So you can simulate a swarm but keep both halves if it's possible to do that. Anyway, swarming does happen. Swarming happens in the wild as well. And oftentimes it might irritate your neighbors. People get a little worked up when they see about 70,000 bees hanging, 6 feet above the ground from a tree in their front yard. Understandably. But as mentioned, our bee association has a call list where if the fire department or the police department or someone calls the association, we have a list of swarm catchers, and our coordinator will call the next one on the list and say, hey, you want to swarm? Sure. All right, here's the address, and you have to go get it right away, because they usually move right away. They don't stay in one place more than 1, maybe 2 nights. All right, so this is the first of 3 nights, and understanding how bees work will help you learn to work with them. It'll minimize the pain, hopefully, and get you launched on your way to being successful beekeepers. There's a survey that's being handed out or available, and we really would like you to fill that out and deposit it on your way out. We have the collection box at the table in the hallway. But you don't have to run off either. We'll also have a Q&A. Next week, we're going to talk about hive components. We're going to talk about all the equipment and tools that are necessary, including personal protective equipment, and how to install your new nukes into your boxes. All right, thank you.
I was going to say, there's 2 very persistent young ladies out there who are going to make sure you drop off your survey forms. So take a minute and fill those out. There's also a food option out here in the hallway. If you've been here since 5:30 and the refreshments weren't enough, they've got some snacks and other sandwiches and other things you can take. But we kind of ended this night a little bit early, and we want to give you time to ask questions. We do have to be out of here by 7:30. They close the building at 8. They get kind of nasty with us at 7:30. So if you have any questions, as I said, anybody with a lanyard, but if you want to come up, we've got a microphone, and we'll be happy to take those questions. I always encourage people to talk to the folks with the lanyards, but if you've got any, that one doesn't work. I don't know, I bet it will, because that young lady up there will make sure it does. Oh, now you're messing her up.
This one. There you go. There's a microphone in the front of the room, but if you don't want to come up, if we can hear your question, we will repeat the question so that everyone else can hear it. And I don't know, maybe we can do a couple questions from here, and then we can break up into smaller groups, and so we can get more questions answered by everybody.
But we hope you understand why bee biology and some of the basics are important. We wanted you to understand a little bit about the industry. Where's all this knowledge come from? Where's all this information you hear about come from? And also, the bee biology, it's so important to be able to look, because I'm like Tim. I struggle to find queens. And I don't want to, especially on a hot July day, I don't want to spend 30 minutes trying to find her. If I see eggs, I know there's a queen's been there in the last 3 days. I'm good. Now, if there's no eggs and I don't find the queen, but there's still some larvae, okay, that tells me maybe I need to keep looking for her because something else could. Now, if that's August and they've shut down, because if it's August, they don't need more drones. So again, you get to understand those biology and those patterns, and that way you can look in your hive and figure out what's going on. You don't have to go through all that. What you got?
What is the difference between pollen and nectar?
Oh, nectar is the sap, the sugary stuff that flowers put off. That's the sugar syrup that the bees will harvest from the flower, and that's what they'll make honey from. The pollen is their only source of protein. So that's where the bees get their protein, is from pollen. So that's why, again, understanding bee biology, when you see the bees bringing pollen in, you're pretty confident, even in the winter, if they're bringing pollen in this time of year, your queen's in good shape because they don't need pollen if she's not in there laying brood. So again, good indication is, they're bringing in pollen, they're coming and going, I'm good.
An oversimplified way of thinking of it is nectar becomes honey, which is the food, and pollen becomes bees. So if you want to use an analogy, think of a car. The car is made of pollen, and the gas is made of nectar.
So are they both the yellow stuff on their back legs?
That's pollen. I think when they collect nectar, they actually ingest it, correct?
Yeah, it's in their honey stomach. They ingest it. When they get back to the hive, they give it to one of the house bees there in the front, and the house bee will scurry off and deposit it into a cell. And then the bees will fan their wings and dry that out till it gets to the right. They're adding enzymes and things, and it's not their digestive tract. It's a specific organ that's called the honey sac, and that's where they'll store that nectar. And they'll add enzymes and things and deposit those into the cells. And that's what, once the moisture content gets to a certain point, then they'll cap that off, and that's your honey.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Okay, so why are the drones placed in specific areas on the frame? Because the queen is, making a choice to lay an unfertilized egg there, and that's typically the pattern of creating brood. The queen will actually put drone along the bottom edge of the frame. Now, depending on what time of year, she may actually create more drone brood. But then when it's, when you're starting to get past swarm season, she may just do one row of drone at the very bottom of the brood pattern, and all the rest will be workers.
But yeah, as you mentioned, on the mating flight, that's all the sperm she'll have for her entire life. So she stores that, and then she will make that decision as she's laying eggs, whether to fertilize the egg or not, as she goes. And that's why they peter out after a while. They've got plenty of resource to go, as he said, up to 3, 4, 5 years even, but they get old. Yes, that's exactly what you do, and that's what we'll talk about. Yeah, the question was, how do we keep them from swarming? Well, you add boxes is one way, and we'll talk about some of the other techniques in the other classes. But yeah, swarming is not a bad thing. They're an animal. They want to reproduce. That's how they've survived millions of years. So you're trying to figure out how to kind of trick them into hanging around. And as Tim talked about, one way is to make splits. There's some other ways that you could do that if you don't want more bees. And I know beekeepers that just let them swarm. Yeah, your honey crop's going to be negatively impacted, but if honey is not your primary objective, and you've got to know, I don't have very many friends, so I don't need a whole lot of honey. So it just fills up the cupboard.
I mean,
my goal is to
one
keep
benefit of swarming is that you have a new young queen as opposed to an old queen who's petering out.
Yeah, that's the other advantage. The old queen left, the hive left behind, they didn't swarm until they left behind some queen cells. They swarm, those queen cells are going to hatch, you got a new queen. So now you got a new queen. The old 2, 3-year-old, she's gone.
Do you kill the old queen, was the
You
question?
can, yeah. We're ordering our club. One of the things we do is group purchases. We're buying, a lot of beekeepers will buy probably, I think, 100 plus queens. So the beekeepers that are getting those queens, we bought those queens because we want some very specific genetics. So what we'll do is we'll take those queens from the supplier, we'll go into our hives and pinch the existing queens, and then wait about 24 to 48 hours, like Tim said, pheromones will drop, the bees will know they're not queenless, and then we'll introduce our queen, and they'll go, hey, she's better than nothing. But it's interesting, when they do swarm, they're leaving behind, and they're going to take insurance. There'll be 5 or 6, 7, 8, 20 queen cells left in that hive. The first one that hatches, first thing she does, she goes and kills every one of those other ones. She'll go sniff them out and kill them all. So she's it. Yes, ma'am.
So you said they do so many in case like something happens on the maiden flight. Do they kill the cells when they get back from the maiden flight, or do they do it right when they hatch?
I think I understood your question. She goes off on a mating flight. She may not make it back. Right. Birds, obstacles, cars, a number of different reasons. She may not make it back. The bees, in that case, if there aren't already queen cells, which there often are, but if there aren't already queen cells, they'll build what's called an emergency queen. As long as they have, larvae of the right age, then they can take that and raise a queen from it. It's called an emergency queen. So, yeah, they've dealt with that in nature a lot.
Are you going to talk about techniques for people that live in bear country?
We will on hive placement, but you're on your own. You need a powerful electric fence. Yeah, Kenny's got experience with it.
It is 100% not a matter of if, but when. So out where we are at Terra Studios, we had a yard. Yeah. So we had bees out there for roughly 3 years, and we thought we were okay. There was a yard about 200 yards from our house. I run a couple of game cams. Bears aren't super prevalent. Didn't have very many pictures of bears. Eventually, the yard was destroyed. So if you do have prevalence of bears, electric fence is kind of a non-negotiable. You wouldn't own a home without home insurance, right? So that's kind of the way to look at it. Back to YouTube again. I'm sorry, referencing YouTube, but you can get a solar charger. There's lots of great solar chargers. We run a very standard fence, like 3 wires. Bottom wire's hot, 12 inches off the ground. Second wire's about a foot above that, so about 24 inches. That's a ground wire. Top wire's 30 inches, hot off the ground. So you go hot, ground, hot. We have very simple poles, solar charger. It's a great setup. It costs money, but yes, they're gonna find it. Not yet, fingers crossed. I don't want to challenge the bears, but we've been good since.
I have a question. Is there anyone in the association that uses horizontal hives at all, or is it mainly just the links?
Anybody with horizontal hives?
Can you repeat the question, please?
She was just asking if there was anybody in the association with horizontal hives. And I don't know of any currently. I know John down at Central Beekeeping Supply, he keeps, or did, out of a horizontal hive. And he's got a couple of YouTube videos. So if you search horizontal hives, you might find John down at Central Beekeeping Supply. But fundamentally, the principles aren't different. You're just, and we'll talk about this a little bit more tomorrow on the hive types, but it's just you lay it out horizontally instead of stacking boxes up this way. So some people find it easier because they don't have to lift heavy boxes all the time. So there's pros and cons and different ways to do it. As I said, we're going to show you one way. There are a lot of ways. So keep that in mind. I encourage you to experiment with what works for you. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, she was. A main,
What are the main causes for a hive to die? Well, colony collapse is well documented, and varroa mites is the most likely suspect, but there are a plethora of other pathogens, and there are also, sometimes it's weather,
this is a human scale
varroa mite.
varroa mite. So imagine you walking around with one or two of these on you. And that's whatever, what
It
it's
could be a
like.
combination of things too, it could also be, weather and
And you can't get it off.
pesticides that affect the nectar quality, pesticides that build up in the honeycomb. It's still somewhat of a mystery, but yeah, there's your prime suspect right over there.
But as a new beekeeper, I mean, I caught a swarm last year, year before last. It was late. But anyway, my point of all that was to say, I did everything right. But I put that swarm in a nuke, 5-frame box, kind of compact. I came back, and I gave them some old comb, because I have some. I came back the next day, not a bee in sight. They all just said, nah, we're good. And they were gone. I mean, you can't put a fence around them. I've had other years where I've gone all summer, everything's great. I go in the fall, gone. It's called absconding. It happens. Sometimes it's because the varroa load gets too high and they go, look, this isn't going to work. And so they'll take off. Could be other reasons, but it happens. I mean, you're going to lose, I tell you, we're going to lose bees. It's very, I want to say uncommon to go into a hive and just see dead bees. Because that's typically, when things get bad, they'll leave. It will happen. If they starve to death, you might find dead bees. If there's a poison event, you might find a lot of, and poisoning events do happen. Somebody decides to spray their pasture and doesn't tell anybody or something.
In 2 weeks, we'll go over integrated pest management, IPM. And, there are chemical ways of dealing with varroa mites, but there are also non-chemical strategies. Several that have developed just recently because the varroa mite has built up a tolerance to some of the chemical agents that are used to treat it. So they're less effective than they were 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, they're living creatures. The parasites are gonna find a way. What other questions we got? We got a little time? Yes, sir. Oof,
How many hives do you start out with?
2?
I would suggest 2, 1 or 2.
I know some people do 1, and again, the only reason I say 2, if you can afford it, is you can compare and contrast, and if you lose 1, you still got bees. It just is what it is. And if you're a brand new beekeeper and you don't have, and we'll go over some of those techniques when we talk about installing bees, but if you have nothing but plastic foundation in that box, there's not a lot enticing to those bees when you install them. So, you gotta convince them to hang around a little bit, and that this is a pretty cool home and to stay. So again, I think 2 is a good number, but I know several people that have just done 1 and they're getting along fine, and they just understand that if they lose those bees, they're just going to buy more. So, or get on our swarm list and go catch a swarm. It's fun. Yes, sir.
4 acres of land, how many hives would that accommodate?
As many as you want to put out there, 4 acres.
As many as you want. Like a 2-mile radius is like 8,000 acres, and that's a foraging distance for a foraging bee. And a 3-mile radius is something like 19,000 acres or something. It's a huge area. So you don't have to worry about, the bees don't care about property lines,
Yeah,
They're gonna go forage within that area.
each city, if you're in city limits, Fayetteville, I think it's 3 hives per quarter acre. I got beekeepers down in Wilson Park in those little lots with 3-4 hives. So, yeah, you're not going to run into a problem with that. What else? Yes, ma'am. No, Absolutely not. I wish Tammy was here.
What was the question?
Oh, sorry. Any problem with having bees and chickens in the same yard? And absolutely not. Eric is a big thumbs up. He's got chickens, and the chickens love anything and everything that you throw at them from the hive. So we'll talk a little bit about, we'll use called a drone frame to encourage bees to raise all their drones on that one frame, because varroa mites prefer drone comb over worker comb. So if you give them a choice, the varroa mites gravitate toward the drone comb. So you take that drone comb and you take it over your chickens, and man, they will love you because they will eat all the varroa mites and they'll eat all the drones too, but soon, there's plenty of those.
So you said the varroa mites are like the #1 thing. So how common are the foul broods? Is that kind of rare?
They are kind of rare. We get, I think we had, at least in my circle, we had one foul brood at the botanical garden this past year, and I knew of one other member. But foul brood, not a big problem. Varroa mite, destructor #1. Everybody's got hive beetles.
And we talk about foul brood in 2 weeks, right? I mean, at least talk about the foul brood in 2 weeks when we talk about pests.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, we'll talk more about those there. But they're kind of rare, so we don't typically do anything proactively about that. But when we do have foul brood, we react, and we'll talk about that. Oh, there you go. Most people don't, but if you try, yes, we'll talk about that tomorrow. In the state of Arkansas, you are supposed to register your apiary. Now, being the great state of Arkansas, even though the honeybee is the state insect of Arkansas, the process for registering a hive is somewhat convoluted and difficult. You go to a website, there is a form, but you have to print that form and then mail it to somebody. And on that form, you need to know the section number and the
Township and the range.
township and or the GPS coordinates of your apiary, which we can all get off Google now. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But to be honest, I'd laugh about it. I don't do it every time I get more hives in a particular spot, but I do try to do it because you can get notified if somebody else was trying to put in a bunch of hives next door to you that happen to be on some. There are benefits to that. And we do have a state inspector that's available to all of us keeping bees, even as hobbyists. They will absolutely come out and inspect your hives. It's good to have it registered so he doesn't have to ask embarrassing questions that you don't want to answer. So I've never been contacted. And in 15 years,
I've gotten some letters, yeah, someone, within 2 miles of me has registered their hives, and I think the letter states that if I have any objections to it, I can voice those objections and stop them, but I've never done that.
I think the end result, you can go pound sand. No, there are convoluted laws. If the person putting the hives is on their own property, even though you're within 2 miles, nothing he can do about it. He can complain all he wants. But now, if somebody is renting that land and putting those hives on that rented land, now you can raise a cane, and technically in the state of Arkansas, you could object to that. But if it's his own land, can't do anything about it. Again, I'm back to my Wilson Park example, because I've got multiple people living around the park that are keeping bees and stuff. What other questions? Yep.
Are there any health issues with too many hives as far as a density of too many hives in one acreage or anything?
I don't think, I've seen guys, you saw the pictures, the commercial guys, they've got thousands of hives in 2 acres. Okay. So they're going to forage. So. We'll talk about that, but yeah, having fresh water available for your bees is very important. Tim talked a little bit about how They regulate heat. In the summertime, they're collecting water, they're putting it in cells, they're fanning their wing, they're creating their own air conditioning in there. So literally, they're using evaporative cooling within the hive to keep it cool, keep it where they want it. So having a water source close by that's not your neighbor's pool is important. And we'll talk about that, because they like pool water.
How far will a bee fly?
About 3 miles. The books will tell you 3 miles. I'll say, as far as they need to go to find what they need. So they're not going to just go 3 miles just for the fun of it. If they can find what they need in 1 mile, 2 mile, they're going to stay in that.
If I have a pond a half mile away, is that okay? Or do I need water in my bee yard?
You want to take
That's a
that
good
one?
question. You don't want water in front of the entrances of your bee yard because they defecate when they leave the hive, so you don't want water directly underneath it. But you do want water probably more nearby, because when we say 2 miles for a forage, we're talking about a worker bee that's nearing the end of its life, and the number of times it's going to fly 2 miles to collect nectar and pollen and fly back to the hive is very finite. We're talking about less than, 5 times. I'm just speculating. But anyway, don't think of that 2-mile forage or that half-mile trip to the water as this resource that bee can do over and over again. Those bees are nearing the end of their life. So.
If it's a half a mile away, if that's all they have, they'll go there. But if it's half a mile away, they may decide your neighbor's pool, which is not half a mile, is better. So less work. And that happens. My neighbor called me one day, said, "Man, all your bees are over here." I'm like, "Yeah, it happens." I said, let me come take a look. First thing I did is I looked at the bee. I said, "Those aren't my bees." He said, "How can you tell?" I said, "I can tell. I'm a beekeeper." No idea. What we found out was a number of teenage boys. I was just trying to help him out. The amount of Coca-Cola spilt all over the deck of the pool was, kind of ridiculous. And told him, hose that down, and you'll probably have a lot. And sure enough, he had a lot less bees. I'd be sure, and I take him a jar of honey every year. So that goes a long way. And invited his kids over to help extract one time. So that again, there's all kinds of ways you can involve your neighbors. My hives are right behind my house, my yard. I live in a neighborhood on a cul-de-sac, and you can see all 3 of my hives. I've got 3 at that location and 5 on another one. But you can see all my hives, everybody driving up and down the road. So, but we'll talk about that tomorrow.
A gift of a jar of honey is always a good thing to give someone if they get a little, hot under the collar. I also have the habit of when I get a swarm off of someone's property and coordinate with them, and then get a free colony of bees out of it, I give them a jar of honey, and they are just so happy that they get to see me capture the swarm, and then they get a jar of honey as a bonus, and they're happy as a clam about it, and so am I. So it works out pretty well.
I'll try to remember to bring some honey for you guys to taste. We were at the Bee Expo, and it's amazing. We do what we call a honey exchange at one of our annual events, a picnic, and the different tastes of the honey, even within the Northwest Arkansas region, because as we talked, nectar is what they make honey out of. So the prevailing nectar on the east side of town may be very different than the middle of, the Wilson Park planted flowers versus some other part. But at the Bee Expo, we did that at a state-by-state level around a huge table. And I thought that was a little much. I spent probably an hour there. It's amazing, the different varieties of honey. I even had some green honey. Apparently there's an algae in Florida that produces a nectar that the bees will actually collect. And it was, in fact, green. It was crazy. There's also honeydew nectar, which is, what honeydew is? It's the secretion from an insect. And the bees will go collect that and use it to make honey with. And it tastes nasty. But I don't know who would want that, but it was something different. So it was kind of interesting. But just walking around different states and tasting their honey, it's amazing. So I've got honeys from a variety of different states. Maybe we'll set up a little station out in the hall or something for y'all to taste. If you've not tasted real local honey, it's very different.
Also, the time of year you extract will change the taste of the honey. I extracted in mid-July last year and got a a very pale yellow classic looking honey with a little tangy flavor to it. Then I extracted a little bit more in mid-October and got this brown, robust, spicy kind of honey. And the two taste very differently. Same bee yard, just a different group of flowering plants that those bees hit in those, 2 to 3 month difference. So yeah, it even varies from month to month based on where they're collecting their nectar.
Yeah, the way I used to beekeep, haven't done it recently. I may get back to it because I'm really missing it. But I was pulling honey throughout the season. So if the bees, once they filled up 4 or 5 frames of honey, I would extract those. And man, you get some really light, sweet, what my family calls spring honey. My kids are always, we got any more spring honey? We got any more spring honey? No. But there's different techniques. We'll talk about that honey extraction as part of our class and different ways. It doesn't all involve a big extractor and all that. There's other ways to do it where you can you'll get very different flavors of honey for each frame you pull during the course of the month or the season.
Are bee traps effective, and if so, when should you put one out?
You should put one out. Yes, bee traps are effective. There's probably a handful of beekeepers, including myself, who put those out every year. He's talking about catching a swarm, create a box, just the right size, just the right, you put a little, and you hang them up in a tree, and you hope that somebody else's bees swarm and go in your box, or wild bees perhaps. A lot of beekeepers put those in their yards, so as much as we may pretend that we get swarms, we all get swarms. We all lose hives and we all get swarms. So we put them in our own yard to catch our own bees, hopefully. So they are effective, and plenty of research there. One more.
I have a lot of hemlock on my property.
Yes.
Is that a problem with the bees?
Maureen, the question is hemlock.
I'm not aware that it's a problem for bees, but that's what we think is probably a problem for you. Well, I know, we're trying to kill it out, but I didn't know, because when it blooms, if it would affect the honey.
Thank you, folks. If you could, big round of applause for our speakers tonight. Thank you. And the library, they're awesome. I look forward to seeing all of you here next Tuesday. And we'll go over equipment and tools. Eric's pushing snacks. He's thinking you might need one for the road, so help yourself. Those are perishable.